Assalamu alaikum and peace. This is your host, Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Well, Muslim Network TV is always there 24/7 on satellite Galaxy 19, which reaches 57 million people subscribe to it. Not in my neighborhood, but in good part of rural America and Canada, where regular television, terrestrial television probably doesn't reach. And we stream also on Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and you can always download our app on your phone, iPhone or Android. Just type Muslim Network TV and it will be there. Download it and enjoy it. Our website is muslimnetwork.tv. And today we'll be talking with my dear friend and a person I love to talk to. He is the one who founded and gave the world a reality which not many people recognized before, that Allah made me funny. That's no other than Brother Preacher Moss. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi barakatuh. My brother, how are you?
All right. Preacher Moss is an all star comedian and educator.
Indeed.
I will find out whether he's more educator or more comedian. His End of Racism comedy and lecture tour was voted Best Diversity Act. He's also the founder of Allah Made Me Funny tour. So, Preacher Moss, where in the world you came up with the name Preacher Moss?
Preacher Moss was given to me. It was given to me. So you have to be careful what you do. I used to make these really inappropriate recreations or imitations of Sunday preachers. So and some of them were good, but some of them were really bad. So I based a character off of a reverend at First Baptist Church at Glen Arden in Landover, Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C. The preacher's name was Reverend John Johnson, who was a really good guy, but he just happened to be a horrible public speaker. And so the mix of those two provided a lot of comedy. And I used to basically do imitations of him giving bad sermons. And that's what kept us kids entertained in Sunday school and on the front row.
So was he your? I mean, was that the church you used to attend?
Yes, yes. When we moved from Washington, D.C. to Maryland, we somehow wound up in Glenard, Maryland, at this church, First Baptist Church at Glenard. Ironically, my mother, they built another church called Shiloh Baptist Church, which reminded my mother of Shiloh Baptist Church back in her hometown of Danville, Virginia. So she became a attendee of Shiloh Baptist Church later on. So a lot of church in my background, Brother Mujahid. A lot of church.
All right. In how many states?
How many states in terms of?
I mean, you said you got a lot of churches in your background. So I want to know, was all in Maryland or other places as well?
Maryland, D.C., Isle of Patmos in D.C. You go down south, Shiloh Baptist Church in Danville, Virginia. You have churches in South Carolina that every once in a while you have to attend. So, you're a typical family man. You work hard Monday through Saturday, and you try and get all your sins rectified on Sunday in an hour of football game. Family before kickoff.
Yeah, so that was the gospel which you were preaching there.
You know what? It's not so much. It's not so much gospel. And I think that you have to be careful when you say that a lot of times, particularly converts. It's really a revelation of how religion made you feel, how it informed your senses. The same as Allah made me funny. Let people know how Islam informed my senses and structured my journey, and by really by default, let people know where I was in my Islamic journey, if you will. Um, Allah Made Me Funny starts off with the fact that I really didn't have a large amount of experience with the immigrant Muslim community.
So,
But
these were the other children in Sunday school who started calling you Preacher Moss?
yeah, the adults, some of the adults, because I had a pretty good imitation back then. Because my whole idea was the reverends were loud, they were rhythmic, and in that rhythm you could say funny things that a preacher wouldn't normally say, and then you could ridicule that whole process. The only thing you didn't do was ridicule God, and as long as you didn't do that, you'd be fine, you'd be all right. You had fun with the whole atmosphere and the ambiance of church. There's a story one time when I was little. They had a guy, a little flamboyant. He was the choir director, and it had a song. It was like, how do you spell relief? And the refrain or the call and response was Jesus. So you go, how do you spell relief? And the crowd would go Jesus. So this guy, for some reason, decides not to follow that pattern. He wants a much grand thing, and he's supposed to say Jesus. He got to it, and he misspelled Jesus, man. He misspelled Jesus, and we were sitting there. Everybody's looking around, and I was the kid going, "Hey, it's Jesus. There's no K in Jesus." But now, those are the things that happen, and the stories. Much the same in the Muslim community, man. The stories and the narratives are powerful, but again, they inform who we become later on.
Hmm. So, share with people, what is your real name?
Oh, I mess with you. Well, my slave name is no.
No, the free name.
My Christian name is Bryant, Bryant. Middle name is Reginald, named after my uncle Reginald, and last name is Moss, MOSS.
So, do you end up meeting some Moss who were slave masters before?
I didn't hear you, brother. I didn't hear you. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, since you mentioned that it is a slave name, I wonder if you ever had accidental meetings with some white folks who have last name Moss.
Yeah, Moss is actually a Jewish name.
Oh,
Yeah, Moss is actually a Jewish name.
so how it became part of the slavery thing?
I have no idea, brother, but
Okay.
find out either. I have no idea. I'm not trying to find out. I'm trying to get through COVID, man. I need no more surprises,
No more surprises.
23andMe, I don't want anything. Ancestry.com, I want nothing to do with it. But I think it also reflects the times, that you have people who were Jewish and potentially were slave owners. This is no big deal. This is
In America?
in America. It's well founded. It's well founded.
I didn't know that. So what is your Muslim name?
Shamsuddin.
Shamsuddin. Wow.
Yeah.
So you're the son and the star of the faith?
Son of the faith. Yes, sir. S-U-N.
Okay.
It's a good name. It's a good name. I like it.
All right.
But yeah, it was referred to me. Someone said this would be the name for you.
When did you accept Islam?
I had a stop and a start with Islam. Like when I was like 19, I started dabbling with it, but I kind of got turned away from it a little bit. And it has so much to do with the support system around you. So I had a support system. Everything I did in Islam was wrong. So at some point in time, you just check out. But my big brother, Reginald Kitchen, may Allah be pleased with him,
I mean,
really introduced me to this idea of Islam that connected in a very particular and powerful way with the W18 Muhammad community and also the Nation of Islam. So you can see the evolution from the first to the second resurrection, and there was history. It's a really important thing, man. When you accept religion, it's a really important thing that you have to understand the history around religion, and that made this second time around the that's the one that stuck, for lack of a better word.
Well, how old were you at that time?
Uh, I was right at 21. So it's almost like you retake your Shahada.
Hmm.
So it's like, yeah, 21. And that was a strong commitment, and quite some years ago, but an extremely strong commitment and something that you tied into. Because that when you get into, when you really put all pieces together and you begin to examine the logic of your decision, it's very, very easy to become even more invested. Like religion, Islam has a certain logic to it, if you will, and it's sort of like pieces of a puzzle, but it's pieces of your puzzle, and that logic is built in such a way that it reveals where you are in your growth, where you want to be, where you were, and it provides it provides really an environment where you're not self-judging yourself. You know what I mean? Like you can become particularly hard on yourself, not understanding that you're really really making progress. But I think that's the beauty of the religion. Sometimes you don't know that you're making progress, but the thing that you've invested in is that you work hard. One of my favorite sayings is, "Allah never wastes the work of a righteous worker." Well, there's a couple of components to that. There's the work, there's the understanding of righteous work, and then there's the worker, which is the ethics or the character of the worker. So it's a lot in that, just that small thing, man. And you start putting yourself in those places, it takes your mind other folks. It takes your mind other places, and allows you to really look at what your life is. That's the scope of how a lot of people come to Islam, how a lot of people convert to Islam. But on the other side, it's also the reason why a lot of people leave Islam, because they're not able to do that, or they don't have the support system to do that.
You sound like a preacher, brother.
Yeah, okay, I'll go with it.
So did some how what was the reaction of the kids who called you a preacher when they heard that you are a Muslim now?
Wow, it was like I've been taken away by aliens, and sponsored by aliens and taken. You could hear them. They were like, "Oh man, Islam got him." That's what they said. I heard a brother go, "You ever having to preach? What happened? You get shot?" No, man. Muslims got him. Islam got him. I'm like, it's not that bad. I'm standing right here. I can hear you. I wasn't accosted. Nobody's going to call you up for ransom. Maybe a fundraiser, but not a ransom. But it was that scope, and also Mujahid had that history in the community that brothers did. That I would become Muslim was not a surprise to people, because it had been happening in my community for years. Years, decades. Washington D.C., Baltimore, that whole area had a heavy concentration of Muslim life, particularly African American Muslim life or Black American Muslim life, and it had it was also an integrated history. So it's not just Muslims; it integrated with the overall community. So it's very commonplace. It's very commonplace.
Yeah, that I have seen. I mean, first time I came here was 1977, and later on, whenever I am in African American community, you're just walking by and somebody will say salam to you. It doesn't quite mean they're Muslim, but the part of Islamic culture has been a part of African American culture, it seems. When my son was going I think he was in first grade, and I don't know why in the world I was looking at his who else are students in his class. Half of the names were Muslim sounding names. And I'll tell my son, hey, these guys are Muslim. He said, no, dad, they are not. And I said, what do you mean? So that's how my entry into knowing that Muslim name and African name are similar. And what I'm thinking are Muslim name, they are considered African name. And some of those kids with my son's first, second grader were actually Muslims, but not all of them.
Well, I mean, I think the other thing is I also came up in the beginning of the rap era, the hip hop era, whereby aspects of Black nationalism, Black pride was strongly tied to Islam. You know, not so much, um, not so much Christian religion, because the Muslim religion for African American Muslims represented this is not your mom or this is not your daddy's religion. You were making a religious choice. And so a lot of people chose Islam because it had a long story that was connected to the African diaspora, um, you know, aspects of Timbuktu, you know, African religion was inclusive of Islam. Middle Eastern religion was inclusive of Islam. And we have been hearing these things for years, going all the way back to Ahmadiyya, to the Lost Foundation of Islam, to the Nation of Islam. So you had this thing that said, you know, there's a God that loves you and his name is Allah.
Well, we were discussing with someone who was a scholar, and he says in the language Jesus spoke, name of God is something which sounds like Allah also. So you're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Preacher Moss, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with my friend, Preacher Moss.
Yes, sir.
He's a well-established comedian. Did other people tell you that you are funny, or you realize yourself that you are funny?
I watched funny people when I was young. I watched funny people when I was young, and I watched funny people who were older than I was. So I watched funny people like Red Fox. I watched funny people like Mantan Moreland, funny people like Moms Mabley, funny people like Nipsey Russell, funny people like Pygmy Markham, funny people like Timmy Rogers. Like these were the funny people in terms of comedian, but I was also blessed that I had a house full of people who were extremely funny. My father was funny. My aunt was hilarious. My other aunt was hilarious. And my uncle was one of the greatest storytellers. I don't want to say storytellers and mean that they weren't necessarily credible stories, but the yarn was so extravagant, you would just go with it. The tale was so wide and expansive, you would just go with it. And I grew up in a place where, let me see here. I grew up in a time where Black liberation, if you will, and coming out of the 60s mandated a new narrative. And so at the time I'm coming up, you have the Dick Gregorys, you have the Richard Pryors, you have the Mort Sauls, you have the George Carlins, you have the Bill Cosbys. You have all these people who are excellent storytellers, but they are they're excellent interpreters of what's going on in the world at a particular time. It's almost like the golden era. And Red Fox. Red Fox, terribly underrated, but one of the best comedians to ever do it. Impeccable timing. In fact, I really patterned a lot of what I did as a comedian after what Red Fox did in terms of timing, because he was a singer. He was a jazz singer. You know, I've never got to listen to his album that he released, but he was a singer and he always had musical timing. And for myself, when I didn't want to be a comedian, and people know this story. I didn't want to be a comedian when I grew up. I wanted to be a jazz player. I wanted to be a saxophone player. But the talent wasn't there, and I realized that early on. So I took that musical inclination and put it in the stand-ups. A lot of times when people listen to or watch me do stand-up, they're really listening to me doing stand-up, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that you're putting out something that's melodic, that has a great tone, a great harmony. And the picking and choosing of words, it piques people's musicality, if you will. And that's the thing. But instead of them singing, they laugh. So that's always been something that's really, really important. And I watch great people do it. I watch, the great Dick Gregory, may Allah be pleased with him, who was a mentor and a friend who helped me refine the aspect of solid social commentary within comedy, which actually laid the groundwork, if you will, for all that made me funny.
Yeah. But you mentioned about Dick Gregory before, he being your mentor.
Yeah.
I met him, unfortunately, completely unaware of who it is. So here I am in Washington, D.C. There are about 250,000 people. He walked by from somewhere and he wanted to go on his stage. I said, no, who's this guy? So somebody told Imam Jamil, who I have asked to be stage manager, because everybody wanted to speak, and I told him these are the four guys going to speak, and that's it. And you are in charge of not letting anybody. So somebody told him, he comes off the stage, he said, Malik, he's great, you got to let him speak. I say, who is this guy? I have no idea. He said, trust me, Imam Mujahid, let him speak. So would you believe that I tried my best to stop Dick Gregory from speaking, but finally I relented, because when I give assignment to people, I made Imam Siraj Wahaj the MC, and he didn't intervene because he was more busy emceeing. But Imam Jamil persuaded me, and I give a space to people who are responsible for something. That's how Dick Gregory spoke in a program which I was the organizer and the main person making decision, and I was trying my best to stop. And then he gave it. He was not much funny. I mean, he was just giving a serious lecture to people to stay away from drugs. That seems to be his thing at that time. How did you meet him?
Well, I was living in Milwaukee at the time. Just first year teacher in Milwaukee. Had wound up there by a series of events that too long to go into, but so I wound up in Milwaukee basically, teaching and doing stand up, and I kind of made a name for myself, alhamdulillah, while I was there, and I had an opportunity to go down to Chicago to perform. They wanted me to come down to Chicago, a place called the Cotton Club. I don't know if it's still there. But they were doing stand-up, but it was during the Def Jam era where you had a lot of blue comedy, a lot of cursing, profanity, sexual innuendo, stuff like that. Let's just say it wasn't halal. Um, so here I am going down to this club, and I told the lady, I said, look, I don't want to be on one of those type of shows. I'm a clean comic. I do social commentary. I said, I'm into Dick Gregory. I'm doing this type of humor. And she was like, oh, no, you have nothing to worry about. We need to have this down here. Da, da, da. Man, I got down there, and it was worse than what I thought it was going to be. So they were bringing on guest comedians that were cussing up a storm and all of that type of stuff. And you're sitting in the back. First of all, the show never started on time. I think the second show, when I went on stage, I think it was 1:45 in the morning.
Oh my goodness!
And it was horrible. I was literally falling asleep in the back of the club waiting to go on. But the people didn't like me. It wasn't my crowd. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't smoking. People didn't like me. So I wound up getting fired. In fact, I was hoping they were going to fire me the first night. They didn't. I got fired the second night, and I was like, alhamdulillah. But it put a dent in my ego. And at that point, I was like, I'm really into this thing about helping my people, helping my African-American people, helping my Muslim people. I'm trying to help, if you will. And I got down a little bit. And I was actually thinking about leaving comedy. I was going to quit. So my mother goes, well, before you quit, I want you to talk to somebody. He can probably give you some good advice. And that person happened to be Dick Gregory. So I don't know where my mother got Dick Gregory's number from. She was like, here's his number. I think he was still living in Massachusetts at the time. And I called him, and he picked up. Hey, this is Dick. Hey, Mr. Gregory, blah, 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 blah. I tell him, oh, yeah. So I spoke to your mother. And I talked to him, and he's like, well, son, I tell him about to quit. And he's like, well, you say you do social humor. I go, yeah. He goes, well, you can't quit. And I'm like, no, it's not a... And basically, he had me go through my set, and he liked the stuff that I was doing. He said, but it ain't for everybody. He said, it's not for everybody. He said, don't take it personal. He said, when you're not for everybody. He said, if you're for everybody, it'd be literally, it'd be a little bit of a little boring, if you will.
Assalamualaikum!
I love Adam's World because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's World because it makes me happy. What? No. And here's Adam and here's Anissa. Adam is and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is really smart.
Download the new Adam's World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
So we need to start about you. So you didn't know Dick Gregory, but your mom somehow knew, and she connected you with him.
Yes. And I called him and I told him everything that had happened at the Cotton Club. Informed him that I had planned to quit. So almost this call was just a courtesy call. And so he was like, well, you can't quit. Tell me what you're working with. And I told him all this material about social justice, racism, things like that. Now, keep in mind, I'm all of about 23. I'm about 23. And so he goes, first of all, you're too young to quit. Second of all, he goes, you have to grow into your material. I was like, what? He goes, you have to grow into your material. He says, these are old man things. He said, stop hanging out with old men. And I said, I don't hang out with old men. I said, I do my research. He goes, I know. He goes, it's a joke. He said, but you have to understand that when you're bringing these ideas to folks, they may not be ready at that point in time. And sometimes you have to empathize with the audience. They may not be ready. And in that, he reminded me the reason why you don't quit is because they still need the information. You still have some type of responsibility when you're on stage to get this information out. Just like the comedian who goes on stage, you have a responsibility to entertain folks. You have to entertain them however you do it. Sometimes it's going to be with songs, sometimes it's going to be with funny jokes, pranks, but you still have a responsibility for the people who come in. And so that discussion, if you will, really laid the groundwork for what I would do later in terms of Allah Made Me Funny, in terms of working on college circuit for, wow, over 20 years. You know, that conversation was so profound and so weighted that it really framed not only how I did it, but how I related to other comedians, and also how I related to our audiences, if you will.
Did you actually meet?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. It was fun to walk up to him. Hey, man, you may not remember me, but a couple years ago, I called you because I was going to quit stand up and die. He goes, stop. He goes, Preacher Moss. I'm like, yes, sir.
Wow. Good memory, huh?
Yeah. Crazy memory. I some of the best times I had with Mr. Gregory was listening to him talk about the fact that essentially he wasn't bragging on it, but essentially he was the comedian for Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X.
So he was the comedian of the civil rights movement, that way.
All the way across, all the way across, and he just reminded me, man. I emceed his 80th birthday party, Washington D.C. 80th birthday party. And the conversation about longevity. Not his, mine. And he was like, how long are you gonna keep doing? I'm like, man, I'm not gonna be 60 years old telling jokes and da-da-da. And then he corrected me, he goes, do you really tell jokes? He said, do you tell the truth? He said, do you show up because you want to uplift the people, or you show up because you want to get a couple dollars? He goes, tell me that. And I said, well, obviously you know the answer. He goes, well, then you're always going to be working. You'll never have a job in comedy. You always have work. And I thought that was amazing insight. You know, my grandfather used to always say, uh, "You always want work. You never want a job." It's because a job, job, for a black man means just over broke. So, yeah, he's a wonderful guy, man. And I also have to credit a lot of musicians. They gave me opportunities, jazz musicians who gave me opportunities, who took me on the road, who shared uh, the artistry, to share the philosophy. You know, one of the big thrills I had as a comedian was I opened for Gil Scott Heron. You remember Gil Scott Heron?
No,
You don't remember him?
no. Tell me.
Oh, brother, you got to go look him up, man. Amazing spoken word artist, musician, singer, just amazing. He did a song called "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." Have you ever heard that before?
Absolutely.
That was Gil Scott Heron.
Hmm.
Winter in America, Gil Scott Heron. Remember B Movie? Um, B Movie. He talked about the Reagan election. People saying it was a mandate. These are all classics.
Hmm.
And
Tell
they
me
came
this.
out-
So, Dick Gregory put you on the course. You got a message, and that's why. So, comedy became a sort of a mission in some ways for you. But were you teachers before that? Before that, or how this combination? I mean, you were a real teacher teaching in a school, right?
yeah, before I got into teaching, I was a group home counselor.
Hmm.
I was a group home counselor. I dealt with at-risk youth. And it's interesting because at that point in time, you really didn't know it was a job. You just knew that it was doing the right thing. So guiding youth, that was it. And they were like, "Oh, here's your check." I was like, "Oh, you get a check for this?" Then you look at it again, I'm like, "This is not really a check." Um, but yeah, I worked at a place called Calorama 2 Group Home off of 16th and T in Washington, D.C. by Adams Morgan. And I worked there. And once I left there, I took a job as a director of youth programs at the Wrestling Community Center, where I met Brother Reginald Kitchen, who, may Allah be pleased with, my big brother, who put me back on that path to Islam, if you will.
Hmm.
And then you flourish from there. I left there, um, came back to Milwaukee to teach youth. I teaching and stand up. Stand up has always been there. You know, it's always been there.
So, how the end of racism tour came about? What were the? I mean, of course, you being a teacher and a comedian, and becoming a preacher mass because you're enjoying your own preacher.
It starts in 1995, actually. I got in a gig. I got a call from these booking agents. Like, I guess it was sort of like college booking agents, but they needed somebody for Black History Month who could talk about race, and they couldn't find anybody. And I was like, "Well, I'm a comedian, but my stuff is social justice, social commentary." And I remember going to this place outside of Madison, Wisconsin, and just having a really incredible show talking about race, using humor, things like that. But I was so wrapped up in stuff like critical race theory back then that this was like a playground. And from that, in 1995, I formed. My first idea was not called End of Racism Comedy Lecture Tour. It's something really long and obnoxious. I think it was the Post Affirmative Action Survival Guide, something like that. It was weird. Um, but a college booked it. It was at my first college was in Canandaigua, New York. It was called Finger Lakes Community College. And I remember I had to figure out how to get there. I was living in California at the time. I had to figure out how to get there, fly in there, rent a car, get there. And I mean, that show really started it. A lot of good things for me in terms of being able to speak truth to power to people who didn't look like me, to people who didn't look like me, to people who didn't have experience with African Americans, to people who didn't have experience with Muslims or Islam or things like that. The people didn't have experience with folks that had a narrative of oppression. It was really eye opening.
So even the end of racism comedy tour, you brought in your Islam and your faith in there as well.
Yeah, man. It's interesting. I'm working on a thesis right now talking about what Allah Made Me Funny was. What Allah Made Me Funny was really this social experiment meant to bring together the indigenous Muslims and immigrant Muslims in a space whereby we could refine what our relationship was. For lack of a better word, build a new narrative moving forward. Because my biggest fear after 9/11 was when they came from the Muslims, they knew we would be easy to be picked off because in many regards we were fractured communities. This community didn't deal with this community didn't deal with this community, we don't like this imam, da da da, and it was all kind of cultural stuff. And we really weren't in the driver's seat of A, our image, and B, being able to go out and realistically promote change, realistically go out and address issues as a strong Muslim ummah. So Imam W18 Muhammad, when I came up with the idea, gave me his blessing. May Allah be pleased with him. He gave me his blessing, but he gave me a caveat. He goes, I want you to start, this is a good idea. And the wisdom of the man goes, I want you to start, but I don't want you to start in this community. He said, start in an immigrant community.
Why did he say that?
He said, we're going to be all right. He said, we have an infrastructure of dealing with this type of oppression. We're going to be all right. We're African American and Muslim. He said, but the novelty of being able to attack and redress and oppress our immigrant brothers and sisters, he goes, there's not a book for that. You're going to go through it a first time. So he said, that language of humor, these people who are trying to whatever destroy us or attack us, goes, that language is an equalizer. So when you can look at somebody who's very angry and a bully, and through language, you could take them apart. I can take you apart. I can take you apart. I can create a whole nother world behind you and take that apart. You're not even a part of that world. I can put you where I want to with humor and language, and you can't respond. That's why you never really heard of Allah Made Me Funny being attacked by mainstream media because they were scared. Islamophobes didn't want anything to do with this because they were scared. Because if you come into this space, this is all my space. You're now on foreign territory. And being on foreign territory, I'm going to pretty much give you the business. So if you're a hater, I'm going to expose you in a very, very funny way that ridicules you being a hater. If you're a liar, I'm pretty much going to do that. And the best part about it is, I'm probably going to use everything you were giving me to do so, to make the case.
So Allah Made Me Funny tour started with your conversation with Imam W18 Muhammad.
Yes.
And
I will also say this. He was forward thinking and understanding that we were speaking to the youth. If you look at Allah Made Me Funny 2004 to now, for 16 years, we've carried a demographic and a half. How about that? We've carried a demographic and a half of kids who maybe when they saw me, they were 9, but now they're full-grown adults. And so they've seen people stand in the middle of everything that's going on and have this language of humor to address what's going on, to seriously look at folks and go, you know what? I'm okay. I'm centered. I'm really, really comfortable with my image. Now let's talk. Let's have a conversation. It was a certain comedic bravado, and I don't mean that in a masculine sense, but in a presentation sense. And it was interesting because the media really responded to that. because they weren't necessarily used to Muslims branding themselves. They were used to branding Muslims, but they were used to Muslims branding ourselves. We're going to own our own identity, and we're going to create things. We're going to create vehicles for our own identity, which was really, really interesting because it hadn't happened in the space of comedy. And comedy is such a big concept. Comedy is such a big, I want to say, idea. So, I mean, we did it. We did it. And the original crew of Allah Made Me Funny was myself, Azhar Isman, and Azim Muhammad. And Azim Muhammad was from the Nation of Islam. So literally in a comedy tour, you had almost the history of Islam in America on stage at any given night.
So, so how long this team of the three went around?
The original group went about 1.5 years. Then it was just Azhar and I for about a year. Then we brought on Muhammad Amr later on. Right.
Who did we bring after that?
We brought on Muhammad Amr.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So we had him. He was the youngest. He was the youngest of the group for a couple of years. Excuse me.
So when did Allah Made Me Funny stop being funny?
It's never stopped being funny. It's never stopped being funny. What it is people grow. People develop their own inclinations. They want to do this. They want to do that. And sometimes in business, we don't agree on things. We don't agree on direction. So rather than put it out there and have it be misconstrued or not be in the correct, I would say the correct positioning, it's easy to just pull back. But there's always going to be Allah Made Me Funny because it was put out in the universe. So it's in videos. People remember it. Remember, we toured pretty straight, man, for about almost 11 years.
So in those 11 years, how many in the Muslim audiences and how many in the audience of neighbors of other faith?
Countless, man, countless. It's really a blur when I think about how many shows we did, how far we traveled, the experiences, planes, trains, automobiles. I mean, it's not just doing shows for colleges or doing shows for matches or fundraisers. I mean, Allah Made Me Funny went to the prisons and did shows.
Were they allowed to do shows in prison?
I did a show in Illinois at an Illinois prison. Fascinating story. Azhar Isman wasn't able to make it. So I had to do the whole hour. I did the whole hour, and they hold back the inmates, and they take you out first. And they put you quote unquote in a safe space. So I'm sitting there in this office, and I'm watching the inmates go by, and see people collecting in this line, and I'm looking at the line, and the corrections officer comes in. He goes, "Listen, we got a little bit of problem. We have some brothers out here. They're Muslim." He says, "They're saying they're not going to go back to the cell unless they can give you salams."
Oh,
okay. He literally goes, "Do you have any salams?" Cigarettes.
Do you have any salams? Huh?
They want a salam. And I remember going out and giving these brothers salams. And that's real. That's real.
You should have told him, in the contract it doesn't say that I have to give salams. It will charge you extra money for that.
Well, I would have, except the show was for free.
Okay. So
but, it was, like I said, it was a very interesting process.
Tell me why Muslim comedian who start off like this, then they get into all sort of using curse words and things like that. So what is happening in that sense?
It's the pressure, man.
Is it clean comedy dead?
Clean comedy's never been dead. And the reason why clean comedy's never been dead, because every comedian does what? They want to be on television. They want to be on network TV. See, before you had Netflix and Hulu and all of that, you had HBO, and even before that, you had your three stations: ABC, NBC, and CBS. So to be on these shows, even the talk shows, you had to be clean. So it's a bit of a misnomer. So and I understand what you're saying and the question that you're asking, but it has so much to do with character. 100% has to do with character. And guys worry, as particularly in Hollywood. I've seen this with Muslims, Muslim comedians, some Muslim artists, they fold. They literally fold. They're not strong enough to say no. They fear saying no because they think that saying no means that they're not going to get an opportunity or they're going to lose an opportunity. Whereby a lot of times saying no means that, I could be more creative than what you're telling me. Let's talk about being creative. And so I think that's what happens a lot of times. And it's the pressure. It's the pressure. I always talk about Hollywood. The first thing when you show up to Hollywood and you have a little bit of steam, the first thing they ask you, what are your core values? And the reason they ask you your core values is because in a pinch, those are going to be the first thing they attack. So it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Hey, you don't mind if, would it be a big deal? Dave Chappelle has this great analogy of working on the movie Blue Streak with Martin Lawrence, and they try to get him to wear a dress. They try to get him to wear a dress. And he goes, I'm funny without the dress. And they're like, yeah, but it'd be really good without the dress, with the dress on. He goes, no, I don't want to wear the dress. And they keep going on. Now he does the whole thing without the dress, and it goes over well. The fact of the matter, he goes, it's not that they really wanted me to wear the dress. They wanted to see if I would wear the dress. So what you have metaphorically is a lot of brothers and sisters who just wear the dress, not understanding you don't necessarily have to. You got to stand up for yourself. That's probably why he's the top comedian now, because he figured that out young. But you have a lot of, and it's not Muslims. I know a lot of really clean comedians, African-American comedians, Latino, they started out clean, but the market says this is what the people want. And they move away from what I stand for to what the people want. And once you're in that space, man, once you're in that space, you're gone. I've seen Dave Chappelle at a Muslim event do an hour, 15 minutes of stand-up clean and be just as funny.
Are there spaces or networks of comedians who do just clean comedy?
They have some, they have some platforms for that. Back in the day, getting on television like the Letterman or the Tonight Show with Carson or Jay Leno, you had to be clean, and you were rewarded for that. But these days, there's such a diversification of television. Like everybody has a show. You have a show, I have a show, everybody has a show, and in that show, you can develop your brand. You can say, I want X, Y, and Z. I don't want X, Y, and Z. And because of that, it lacks a certain uniformity, or I want to say a protocol or a standard, because everybody's doing everything. So, a guy goes, hey man, I want to be a star. Somebody goes, well, there's two lines. There's a line of people over there who they don't do drugs, they don't curse, they don't do alcohol, Is that line? It's real long line. Then there's a line next to it. It's real short, where if you just do that, you're at the front of the line. And so a lot of people go, I'm not getting in that line. I'm going to get in that line.
Well, thank you so much, Preacher Mas. It was a joy to talk to you and allowing us to get insight through your life and your connections and what you bring to the world. You have been watching Muslim Network TV, and Preacher Mas was our guest. He's an all-star comedian and educator. His End of Racism comedy tour, as well as Allah Made Me Funny tour, has been a classic and a hit.
Allah Still Lets Me Be Funny. That's what I'm gonna name it. Allah Still Says I'm Funny.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Sherdil Khan and Dr. Abdul Wahid, for producing today's show. And thank you for watching, and stay tuned for other programs. We're 24/7 on Muslim Network TV. which is we produce 8 hours daily programming, which is repeated 3 times in 24-hour cycle. And you can watch us not only on Galaxy 19 satellite with 57 million subscribers, but we stream online on muslimnetwork.tv. We're also there on Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and you can download our app, Muslim Network TV, on your iPhone or Android. Thank you so much for being with us, and stay tuned for other programs, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel and Facebook page like that, and be with us. Peace. Salam.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.